In this video, I'm going to be discussing a little bit about direct perceptual philosophy. And I want to present direct perceptual philosophy in contrast and critiquing phenomenology. So you might think of them as being very similar, like I said, direct perceptual philosophy. So if it's a direct experience, well, it's going to be one of two things, probably empiricism, right, or phenomenology. Phenomenology dealing more with this introspective aspect, and empiricism dealing more with the sensory aspect. But what a direct perceptual philosophy really is, it's a combination of the two, right? And we're looking not necessarily at the level of the sense, we're looking primarily at the level of the percept and perception, and where we have sensory information being encoded directly into perceptions, and where potential where we're approximating reality. We're not necessarily discerning it as absolutely true, or that this must be the case, rather that it's most likely the case, and it's most likely in the case often within a pragmatic sense. It's useful for me as an individual, right? And with regards to that apparatus, but it also involves direct perceptions, direct self-subjectivity, and this concept of selfhood, which is what the phenomenologists are typically concerned with. But they typically neglect the direct perceptual. So, for example, I can be looking at you as an individual, and then not necessarily see your self-subjectivity, but see self-expressions. And those self-expressions might not necessarily convey the same type of information that I'm receiving from my precepts. And it doesn't, your phenomenology, in this sense, is not accessible to me. But what is accessible is your self-expressions, and that's still accessible through my direct perceptions. So a direct perceptual philosophy isn't so much concerned about simple introspection, though it includes introspection, but mostly in regards to my own personal self-subjectivity, and then also the inferences I can make regarding others' self-subjectivity. And it's focused more on this empirical as well as aspects of direct phenomenology rather than indirect phenomenology. And we can think of indirect phenomenology as pertaining more to some of these metaphysical or abstract notions that are a little bit divorced from direct experiences, such as the idea of soul flight, or other people, unless you've had an experience of soul flight, it's very, very hard to say that, say, there are ghosts flying around and monitoring us in our waking experience. This is a very radical claim, but it's a radical claim that often you might see a phenomenologist pose in regards to what's possible in terms of consciousness, and consciousness as something that impacts the self in particular, in the self and surroundings, where you might have, say, like a lucid dream, which is associated with this idea of soul flight, where you can come outside of your body, and astral project is another term that's often used for it, and have a sense of bodily awareness. But then you might overextend this to applying to waking states, and that you might be able to monitor this in everyday life. And there really isn't that much evidence for that. And nor is there evidence to suggest that you really are a soul when you're engaging that, especially because if you're lucid dreaming, you're dreaming, right? So a direct perceptual philosophy, if you have one of these lucid dreams, would limit its philosophy to theorizing regarding it as a lucid dream, and might speculate in regards to a soul because there are parallels there, but it wouldn't assert or deem it as worthy enough for establishing knowledge or any sort of epistemology based off that. Where a phenomenologist might make that leap and might overextend. So a direct perceptual philosophy very much is concerned with the precept, and where we develop understanding and knowledge of the world and meaning, and understand the nature of perceptions from the precept's relation to sense experience, and the precept's relation to self-subjectivity. So when I'm observing another, I'm inferring a self-subjectivity through often self-expressions and expressions of their behavior, and more of these complicated, higher order perceptual processes that are expressed through perceptions, motivations, emotions, feelings, actions, and behaviors, as well as ultimately various forms of expression, self-expression, and embodiments. And a lot of even our understanding of social cognition comes largely from direct perception rather than phenomenology, where phenomenology is typically when we start to get into a lot more of bias and particularly also prejudice as well. So it's important to keep that in mind because in a direct perceptual philosophy, we don't want to overextend our assumptions too much, and we want to make sure that we're proportioning our uh, skepticism in relation to what's observable, but also that we can distinguish the difference between speculation, establishing a hypothesis, and factual information. And a direct perceptual philosophy is primarily concerned with the former, speculation, and establishing strong speculations, which aren't asserting no's, they're meaning predicated. And they speculate based off what we can know and what is directly observable. And this is the first predicate for establishing a hypothesis or even knowledge from information that we can directly perceive. And that's occurring through speculation, which is very, very important to developing a direct perceptual philosophy. So that's a bit of an introduction to direct perceptual philosophy, and that's all I'm going to be saying for this video. And I'll be talking about this a lot more in upcoming videos, but also in blog posts and in my books.